Alrighty, well, good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Doffney, and I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome our speaker for today, Dr. Benjamin Lapidus, who is Professor of Music and the Deputy Chair of the Department of Arts and Music at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, which is part of the City University of New York. Today, Dr. Lapidus is going to be talking to us about how we can trace some origins of Latin music through New Jersey. And while New York City gets a lot of the attention, a lot of that kind of spilled over into northern New Jersey in particular, and how we can find those roots over the past 100 years of kind of the Cuban experience and as well as Cuban music and culture that came from New Jersey. Just a little bit more about Dr. Lapidus. He teaches popular music of the Caribbean guitar, world music, and other courses at the City University of New York. He has also taught Cuban tray and guitar in the Jazz and Contemporary Music program at the New School University. He has given master classes and workshops on Caribbean music throughout the world under the auspices of Carnegie Hall and the Smithsonian Institution and numerous other institutions throughout the United States. He served as a scholar in residence for the Jewish Museum of New York during several humanitarian trips to Cuba. He has published a book about Changui and the music of Eastern Cuba, as well as peer-reviewed articles and book chapters on Cuban and Puerto Rican music. So welcome, Dr. Lapidus. We really appreciate you speaking in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month. And before we get into your presentation, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over. First and foremost, we will be taking your questions at the end of Dr. Lapidus's presentation, but you can submit them at any time using the Q&A or the chat feature in the Zoom dashboard. At the end of the webinar, there will be a survey available. So if you have time, we ask that you please complete the survey. We really appreciate any and all feedback that you can give us. And if you want more information about what Dr. Lapidus is going to be talking about today, or the Latino experience in America, you can read his chapter or the entire volume of Latinos in New Jersey, Histories, Communities, and Cultures. So I would check your local library for a copy of that book. We also have a few copies at the State Library as well, if you're interested. And then one last thing is just a brief overview of the Zoom dashboard. This is what the dashboard should look like. If you're using a PC or a Mac, if you're using a mobile device, the dashboard may look a little bit different, but all of the features should still be there. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can check your audio settings. So if you're using an external listening device, like a headset or earbuds, you could check to make sure it's connected properly there. At any point during the presentation, if you have any issues, there's a raise hand button here in the middle. You can click on that and that'll alert me. I will send you a message in Zoom and hopefully be able to resolve any problems that you are having. And lastly, as I mentioned, if you do have questions, we'll be taking them at the end of the presentation, but you can submit them at any time using the Q&A or the chat features in the dashboard. So, well, that is everything that I have for you. So it's my pleasure now to turn it over to Dr. Lapidus.
Hi, thank you, Andrew. Thanks for the introduction, and it's great to be here with you today to talk about Cuban music in particular and in its connections with great state of New Jersey. I'm actually in New Jersey at the moment and bringing it even further closer to home. I'm going to hit, share in my screen and just get a little bit better oriented here. Let's see if I can. It looks like I have to do. All right, I'm gonna do share first, and then share PowerPoint. Share PowerPoint. Okay. Share PowerPoint. Okay. And now we can go slideshow. Okay.
Looks good.
All right, so of course, in this image, I've juxtaposed the flag of New Jersey with the flag of Cuba. It's not really an exaggeration. We'll talk about why, but really, we can look back to um, even before the 1900s, but for the purposes of today, I want to start really at the cutoff around 1925, 1926, so we get an even 100 years to talk about this relationship between Cuban music and the music scene in New Jersey. I thought I'd get us started by showing you a clip of the great Cuban singer La Lupe. Here she is on the Dick Cavett show, and I'll let her speak for herself, but she talks about Union City, New Jersey, and in particular, the Cuban community here.
The surprise is that I know that you like cookies, and I brought you Cuban cookies, tortica de morón, and I want you to try them because they're very good.
You bring me cookies?
Sí, aplaudan. Torticas de morón, you know, they make it for you in Union City. We have like a big community, like 150,000 Cuban people. We live there, and we have bakery, laundries, you know, like a little Cuban. They make it for you with love. So take it, you know, Cuban cookies. Torticas de morón, mantecadito, caballero, con salsa, con sabor a jaina más. La moral no es alta, pero es abundante. Toma los cookies.
A lot of people.
So with that little phrase that she said, it's kind of like it's humbly, these cookies are given to you humbly. It's not much, but this is what we have to offer. Now that number of 150,000 Cubans in Union City, it's not precise. And in looking at other literature and census data, I'm not sure that that number of 150,000 was ever reached, but the Cuban community was very much involved in all areas of the city, as well as in West New York and elsewhere in northern New Jersey. The earliest presence of Cuban musicians recording in New Jersey happened with two groups. The first was in 1926, and then the next was shortly thereafter that. These are probably two of the most important groups in the history of Cuban music from this time period, as they popularized a genre of Cuban music known as the son. The son became the national genre of Cuba, although in the beginning son was considered to be risque. It was considered to be low-class music. It was considered to be music that was associated with Afro-Cuban culture and Afro-Cubans, which eventually then was accepted and became the national genre par excellence. This is what we're looking at right here, is a sheet from the recording sessions that El Trio Matamoros made here in Cuba. I have this flipped, so I'll talk about Sexteto Habanero in a moment. But this is from the actual recording sessions. It tells you what they recorded, who was playing what. This was in the studios in Camden, New Jersey. Camden, New Jersey at the time had probably the best recording technology. Columbia Records, RCA Victor, etc. All had these microphones. By today's standards, perhaps we wouldn't think they're that great, but the one in Camden, New Jersey was the best of the best. And so both Sexteto Habanero in 1926 and subsequently El Trio Matamoros came in 1928 and recorded many 78s for commercial release for Columbia Records, RCA Victor. The 78, if perhaps some of you are not familiar, was a very thick shellac record that spun at 78 revolutions per minute. This preceded the LP, which was 33 and a half, and the 78 could only hold a maximum of 3 minutes per side, so none of these songs are really much longer than 3 minutes. For the Trio Matamoros, it was just three musicians, Rafael Cueto, Ciro Rodriguez, and of course Miguel Matamoros, who also played guitar and sang. So what to say? These recordings, we could find them on YouTube, perhaps in the question and answer session. I don't have audio to play for you right now, but I just really wanted you to see the logbook. This is the type of data that shows us, here we go, May 25th of 1928, just an enormous quantity of music. And they probably have to do many takes of this music, but this is just what they did in one day. And I believe this is only the first side of the sheet. So they probably recorded these, took a break, and then here you can see it says Camden, May 29th. And then it keeps going on here, date continued on to next page. So they came, they worked very hard, they recorded their music, and they sold the music internationally. As they went back to Cuba, they were on these multinational labels, both Sexteto Habanero and Trio Matamoros. I should also point out, before continuing that the first recording ever made of Cuban music in the history of Cuban music was actually made in New York City in 1899 by the vocalist Chalia Herrera, and the song was called Two. So this nexus of Cuba and the Northeast, New Jersey and New York City is really goes back to the 19th century, at least in recorded music. I want to show you a clip now of the Sexteto Habanero, just to show you how huge they were, that they would come to Camden, New Jersey and record, and how much international success they enjoyed. This is from a 1929 movie called Hell Harbor, in which Sexteto Habanero is seen performing on screen, but they also were performing the songs that they recorded in New Jersey. And this again is a Hollywood feature film, and you can see what the musicians looked like and what the music sounded like back in 1929.
Gracias, chicos.
So the instrumentation here is typical of what you would have found in the 1920s. That clay jug is called a botija or botijuela, and that was sort of a transition to the instrument that was next to it that was being plucked, called a marimbola. That was the original bass instrument. And then here, next to the clay jug, you have the tres, which is a Cuban guitar with 3 pairs of strings. And to the left of the jug, you also have someone playing the maracas. And then behind it, you have the trumpet. And of course, you got to see some footage of the bongocero, the person playing the bongo. This is son as it was performed in Cuba, really in the western part of Cuba in the 1920s. And this made it onto the Hollywood radar and the Hollywood screen. This was all the rage for a number of reasons. Of course, prohibition, many people in the United States were going down to Cuba to have access to rum, but also because this was the music that really captured the listening and dancing feet of so many people around the world. And of course, this is the band that started with the first recording in 1926 in Camden, New Jersey. I want to now show you just a real quick clip of El Trio Matamoros. This is obviously later than the recordings, but I thought it'd be better to have a visual than to have just the audio. So obviously with 2 guitars and voice, this is also somewhat easier to record than a larger ensemble, which is also another reason why they probably were able to record so many more songs while they were here. I'm going to move ahead. The Cuban community of northern New Jersey, particularly Union City, West New York, etc., can trace back to this area of Villa Clara or near Santa Clara that is called Fomento. And the story is that there was a couple on vacation in Miami, and they met an Italian-American woman from this area. And she said, they were on their honeymoon in Miami, and it was around 1949, I believe. And she said, why don't you come and visit me in New Jersey? and they got a car and they drove up and they spent a couple days and they had a good time and they said, you know what, we're gonna settle here. And then they told their friends and family, and before you know it, a lot of people were settling in Union City from this town of Fomento. And keep that in mind for later as we move ahead. Um, this part of New Jersey also was home to the embroidery industry for a long time, and there were a lot of jobs, and of course, this helped facilitate migration. Now, who were some of the people who were coming to perform in New Jersey from Cuba to sort of plant the, I should say, satiate the interest in Cuban music that people had here going back to the 1930s and 1940s. Well, here's an advertisement from the Daily Record in Long Branch, 1944, for a performance at Ellinson's Cafe that was going to feature some Spanish and Cuban music. Of course, there was the great orchestra of Jose Curbelo, and what's really interesting about this band, for those of you who might be fans of Spanish Caribbean music, particularly salsa or anything related to what it's called today, but in the old days, Cuban music. Here is Tito Rodriguez, the great singer, one of the kings of the Palladium Ballroom, and he got a big break here working with Jose Curbelo. Curbelo was a band leader, but he eventually became a booking agent and booked people like Tito Puente and many other artists. I actually, in the book chapter that I wrote as part of the Latinos in New Jersey book, I gave a lot of detail of all of the archival data that showed all the performances by Cuban ensembles in New Jersey, going back to the 1920s all the way up to the 1950s. I didn't want to inundate you with tons and tons of images and tons of cutouts, but I wanted to just tell you that, you know, the notable figures in the history of Cuban music, even Cuban musicology, people like Fernando Ortiz, when he passed, his obituary was in local New Jersey newspapers. These are mainstream, not Spanish language newspapers, covering information about Cuban composers and Cuban music. Here's another example. This is the great Cuban composer Gilberto Valdés, and here's a brief mention of him here, talking about he lives in Rutherford and what he's done. They don't really get into the history of Gilberto Valdés and his place in Cuban music history. They do call him the Gershwin of Cuban music, but that's there's more to the story there. But there were many composers, many musicians who were covered in the mainstream English language press up through the 1960s. I would also point out something in terms of bringing Cubans to New Jersey. There was a baseball team that was associated with the Havana Sugar Kings that had an outpost here in Northeast New Jersey that was called the Jersey City Sugar Kings. Prior to 1960, actually, I think they had a different name, but a fair number of Cuban players in the area also supporting music. Once we get to post 1959, we have a major influx of people from Cuba, and this is sort of what it looked like at the time.
A Freedom Flight plane from Miami brings 25 Cuban families to a new life in northern New Jersey. The refugees from the Castro regime are sponsored by the New Jersey Synod of the United Presbyterian Church. 23 churches have found homes for the families and jobs for the wage earners, most of whom had been business or professional people in Cuba. Through warm-hearted friends, they find new opportunities in uncrowded communities.
And that's also something we can keep in mind as we go forward in time, looking at the demographics and how things change. Post 1959, what's really fascinating about Cuban music is that it immediately sort of the seeds are laid prior to that, as we just discussed, and then once we get to 1959 onward, There's a huge explosion of venues to hear Cuban music, all on Bergen Line Avenue, which is affectionately called the Bergen Line Strip by a number or referred to as the Strip by the musicians. And these were restaurants, lounges, theaters, any place that could have music, have people listening to music, dancing to music. There was even one that was above a sandwich shop. People were very creative in where and how they would host musical events, and also how it would be promoted. What's really fascinating, this is from the La Tribuna newspaper. You can see on the right-hand part of your screen all of these listings for different clubs. This is probably into the 1970s. This is 1975, I believe. But you get a really good sense of some of these places. Like here, you've got El Pavo, the turkey. You've got La Perla, Catalino's Steakhouse in the bottom there. We'll talk about Catalino's Steakhouse in a moment. And of course, the Havana Madrid up on top. And then we've got music by Sonia and Oscar. They were very active in Newark. I'm kind of going to focus right now mostly on Bergen Line Avenue and West New York, Union City down to Jersey City, even Hoboken. But we can talk about Cuban music in Elizabeth and Newark and other places throughout Jersey. But this is really the focus. So you can see even in the pages of the newspaper, this is now Spanish language newspaper, the goings on of the musical scene and nightlife, as it was quite vibrant. Now you've got other clubs here in Nuevo Kibu that brought performers from around the world. Really, in you had Tongolele, the great cabaret star. Here's Orlando Contreras, a very important Cuban vocalist. Here somehow the Chateau Madrid, but somehow we've got an ad for Victor's Cafe, which is actually New York City, so that shouldn't quite count. Now Catalina's Steakhouse, a really interesting story, and a good sort of way for us to see what happens with different communities come to a neighborhood and how things change. It was originally called Catalano's Steakhouse, and it was owned by Italian Americans. And then when it was bought, I believe, by a Peruvian individual and featuring Cuban music, they just changed the one letter from Catalano to Catalino. I guess it was probably a better economic choice in terms of the signage, but also if they already had the name recognition as Catalanos, it was a small change. And this was also a great venue for performance of Cuban music. I'm going to try to show you some more about that in a moment. This is a nightclub that's very interesting. It was called La Choza, and if you look at this photo, you'll see these two women here. These two women, the hermanas Cano, the Cano sisters, they were very active in 1920s and 1930s. There was a walkway in Havana where there were bands that would play outside at night in the 1920s and 30s, and there were two groups that were made up of all women. One was this group, the Cano sisters, and the other one was Anacaona, which was a family of musicians, all women who were Afro-Cuban and Chinese, who all played instruments and had a big band, toured around the world. Their descendants still maintain the band, but the Cano sisters came from Havana and settled here, and then rather than playing outdoors, and obviously they were considerably older, they set up shop here at La Choza. One of them played saxophone and one of them played piano. And I always like to highlight the participation of women in all of this stuff. So this was a major venue with performances by these sisters and their band on the regular. Here's another ad for La Choza on 14th Street in Bergen Line, of course, with Orlando Contreras. And then there you see this is the summer dates for their shows. That's a lot of performances there. Six just for May. So it looks like they did 3 a week. Then you had other clubs like the Capri or the Capri that had these performers known as vedettes, who were singers, dancers, and show people, if you will. Here's another bunch of ads. Here you have Vicentico Valdez, another very well-known singer performing at Catalinos. Again, it was Catalanos, and now they're calling it El Catalinos. So you can see a transformation right there. This is the Club 38, Club 38 on New York Avenue, and here is the inaugural opening. You've got all these different performers, and it looks like a lot of music for one night. On the top right of your screen, you'll see Mi Guitarra, which was a restaurant. Benny Diaz was the owner, where they had music regularly. He just passed not long ago. And then I thought this was interesting because there's a connection there. Here you have a furniture warehouse, and here you have a piece of their jingle from the radio put into the advertisement in musical notation. I'm not sure how many people read musical notation back then who would look at this newspaper, but it's pretty impressive that they would do that to me in this advertisement. And remember that furniture warehouse talking about music when we get to talking about Punto Guajiro. Here's again an advertisement for Carolino Steakhouse. And the reason I picked this one to show you is because the musical director for the evening here, or at this point in the club's history, was none other than Lázaro Prieto, who was a very well-known upright acoustic bass player from Cuba. Lázaro Prieto in Cuba had been actually a chemist. He was trained as a chemist, and he made candies and sold candies, bombones. There's a great interview I was able to study and read that he did. That's in the FIU archives, and he talked about how he made the candies and how he sold them. So he really didn't make his living as a bass player, although he really excelled in music. He eventually came to the United States and then later settled in Puerto Rico, but he was very well known in Cuba, and here in the United States he worked with a lot of people. One of the most important people that he played bass for was none other than Arsenio Rodriguez, who was very important in the history and development of the Cuban song, both in Cuba and as a change here in the United States, sort of the grandfather of salsa. So the musicians of the highest caliber, someone like Lázaro Prieto, is running the band at Carolino's Steakhouse. Another figure who was popular at Carolino's Steakhouse was a musician by the name of Facundo Rivero. You can see him here on the left. That's a promo shot, and also on the right. Facundo Rivero played piano with very, very excellent technique. He also was a vocalist, and he recorded a number of recordings. Here you can see recordings for Capitol and Victor, and I believe he recorded for Columbia as well. And other people recorded his music, people like Noro Morales. Here you have Los Tres Diamantes and Carlos Molina. So a major artist in Cuba with international, multinational recording companies backing him up, finds his way back here in New Jersey post the revolution. This is a very brief clip of a movie by the comedian Alvarez Guedes, and you can see him right there. I'm just showing you the beginning of this clip because you can see Facundo Rivera introducing Gladys Ibanez, who was another vedette who lived up here in West New York. And this is just a film that Alvarez Guedes made called Blah, Blah, Blah. You can find it. It's a pretty funny movie, but I wanted you to see that in this quick excerpt, you can see some great musicians like Virgilio Martí, and of course, Facundo Rivera, who we just told you about, is introducing the band at the Carolino's Steakhouse. So you can see what the inside of the steakhouse looks like.
Vengo desde tus brazos y no sé hacia dónde voy. Desde tu corazón me dice adiós un niño y yo le digo adiós. y ahora de mi propia inspiración. Que va, esta gente no son nada románticos. El Catalino Steakhouse se enorgullece en presentar a su artista Gladys Ibáñez, el bombón cubano Virgilio y sus tambores. Vengo desde tus brazos.
So that was that's Facundo Rivera, and then you saw Rivero, pardon, and then you saw Virgilio Martí come out. Virgilio Martí also acted in Ruben Blades' film Crossover Dreams. I think it's Leon Ichazo actually is the director, and a great vocalist. This is getting into the 1970s here. You can see some great bands, Orquesta Riviera, Realidad, Latina 76, Segunda Edición. This is $10 for New Year's Eve here at the Embassy Hall. And another venue called the Pavilion. This was a photo from the same time period, what the club looked like on the inside. Perhaps some of you attended these venues. Another really fascinating thing about Cuban musicians and Cuban groups in New Jersey is that two in particular actually returned to perform at the U.S. Naval Base in Guantanamo, Cuba. Those two groups are, of course, the Charanga 76, and of course, Celia Cruz. Here is a photo of the musicians from Charanga 76 going to take the ferry to get to Guantanamo, and this is Gabriel Chinchilita Machado, who still lives here in Union City, and Angel Mandaria Perez, who's deceased. Here they are taking a bus, excuse me, U.S. Navy bus on the base to get to the performance, and here they are posing with some soldiers. There was also a representative from Fania Records there as well. With the band. So another important Cuban musician who was able to go back to Cuba only from the Guantanamo Naval Base side, of course, was Celia Cruz, and this was a little clip I thought you might find interesting, showing her trip.
Guantánamo.
El punto más alto dice. Sí. Azúcar.
Para que desde allí pudiera sentir con sus ojos al menos uno de los paisajes de Cuba a los que ella siempre le cantó.
¿Y aquí dónde está Caimanera? Caimanera, ¿dónde está? Que yo la canto.
¿Tú ves la islita esa?
Sí.
Atrás de la isla.
Eso es Caimanera.
Eso es Caimanera.
Ah.
¿Y tú le cantas a Caimanera?
Sí, yo en esa canción que yo canté ayer.
Sí.
Que yo digo, qué bonito es el Caney. Guantánamo, Caimanera.
Y muy humildemente, en un vasito, trató de llevarse su tierra.
Por si acaso no regreso.
Y ella tenía un vasito.
So obviously deeply meaningful for both Celia and Charanga 76 band members. Celia Cruz taking home some earth with her because she was never able to return back to Cuba.
Guantánamo.
Who were some of the first groups of Cuban musicians that formed in New Jersey as opposed to in New York and New Jersey? Just New Jersey. Well, first we had Papito Sanchez's group, the Jersey Cuban Boys, and they were placed actually on a lot of venues on the bill with New York salsa bands, but they were very proud of being Cuban and always referred to the music as Cuban music. So although they played modern music, they called it Cuban music, not salsa. And these were young men that started in around 1966, their band. Then, of course, we have this triumvirate of Havana Brass, Orquesta Riviera, and Orquesta Zodiacal. These were three groups that more or less had many of the same musicians in them, but they kept splintering off from the original group. And then I'll explain a little bit why that was. But Orquesta Riviera was quite successful. They made 3 albums. Here on the right-hand side is what they sound like.
Oye bien lo digo yo, cantando este guaguancó que tiene cadencia y son, y sabroso lo traigo yo. Escuchen con atención a esta linda inspiración, traigo del corazón y sabroso lo canto yo. Oye Cuba, oye mi ritmo africano, yo.
On the left-hand side of the screen, a great group that was called Los Himaguas, which means the twins, two brothers, and they both played percussion, and they had a vocalist who was from a group that was very popular in the 30s and 40s in Cuba called Gloria Matancera, and the vocalist had actually been a barber, but he sang with this group Los Himaguas. Orquesta Zodiacal also came out of this Riviera group. Orlando Espinosa was one of the band leaders. And then a really, really important band for the history of New Jersey and really Latin music and Spanish Caribbean music that nobody really talks about was a kind of training band led by this individual seated down there in the middle. His name was Omar Junco. He gigged under the name Omar de Juncos. And he was a contractor, but he loved the old style of Cuban music from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, particularly the mambo. And he used his band was kind of a training ground for young musicians. He would go to all the different high schools, Union Memorial, everywhere, and take the brass players and other musicians from those bands and have them play the music of Benny Moré, the music of Sonora Matancera, all the great Cuban music of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And if you notice the tuxedos, I had a lot of friends who played in this band at different times, and he would go to secondhand shops and get tuxedos, even if they were wildly out of fashion and the colors weren't so great. He was a real showman. He wore a wig, and Elvis Presley was actually one of his heroes, and that's why he has kind of like an Elvis wig, but he was playing Cuban music. Many people who perform with some of the top Spanish Caribbean musicians today, people in Mark Anthony's band, people with Ray Barretto, you name it, they all went through this band, and this band was active for about 30 years. And this was a training ground for a lot of young musicians in this neighborhood. This particular photo, I believe, was taken at the Uruguayan Lounge. It was a Uruguayan association in New Jersey. And this group played weddings, bar mitzvahs, quinceañeras, senior birthday parties, you name it, a lot of senior centers. And it was really a great training ground for these musicians. Although they have lots of stories that are quite humorous, I think it was really beneficial. And probably the clothes are the thing that most of them, when talking about the experience, a lot of the clothes were sort of the funny thing that a lot of people remember. Here you can see, here we are in 1980. This is Omar de Juncos right there. In the middle, there's the Elvis wig, but he wasn't playing any Elvis music. He was also in the military, which was quite interesting. So when he was called up for duty, one of the bands that he was in kind of made a mutiny, and then that's why he formed this band. That would be the Havana Brass Ensemble. Going into the 80s, we have lots of Cuban events besides the parade for the Cuban community. There are lots of different events, and this is just one example. Another huge population explosion in the United States of people coming from Cuba in 1980 was the Mariel boat lift, in which 125,000 Cubans came between April and June, July of 1980. A lot of people settled up here in New Jersey and brought with them a lot of musical traditions that maybe weren't still as well known, particularly with Afro-Cuban religious music and spirituality, but also with rumba and other types of folklore. Another type of folkloric music, which is really popular from the central part of Cuba, sort of a Cuban country music, is called Punto Guajiro or Música Guajira. is performed using a 12-string lute instrument called a laúd, which originally came to Cuba from Spain, and the guitar and some percussion. And then it involves a type of poetry that's called a decima, which is 10 lines of text in 8 syllables. And it's a poetic style. The music is kind of secondary, but there was a huge group of people who were really into this music, and they would have get-togethers in a carpeting supply store in Union City, and then eventually they would get together in Las Palmas and a few other places like bars and places on Bergen Line Avenue. This is an example of that music, and El Parnaso Campesino I talk about in the book chapter, but you can see this is, as I told you before, to think about that furniture store that had the musical ad. This was a scene that kind of had its base in a linoleum tiling and carpeting shop where they would get together and do this type of music, and then they expanded outwards to do more events in the community. This is what the music sounds like.
Mi rayo despierta el gallo que usa el timbre mañanero. Despierta el gallo que usa el timbre mañanero y le da el sol al pechero de la quincalla de mayo. No pudiera ser el rayo que la oscuridad se rucha, y cuando enciende su pucha, en vez de una tempestad, llovizna felicidad sobre el hombre que lo escucha. Eso es un huracán que conoce del chiquillo por donde lo lleva el trillo al gajo del flamboyán.
As you can see, the music is sort of secondary to the poetry. That there's not a lot of this happening now. There's really more happening in the 70s and 80s. And I remember in the 90s going to some of these events at Las Palmas, and they're really not happening that often. There was a venue called Cuculambe. I remember one time going to hear. It was a bar where they did this, but it's not that frequent, although once in a while things seem to happen here in the summertime. And as a result of the Mariel boat lift and the arrival of more African-derived spiritual practices, Santeria, Palo, etc., and folkloric music like rumba, there was a real movement where there was a club, actually, I think it was on Summit and 14th, called La Esquina Habanera, and they had live rumba that would be played. This was mid-90s, maybe 95, 96, 97, 98, and the club, it stopped having live performances, but it was really central to the community in terms of live Cuban folklore music. This is what it looked like.
Nacido del corazón, lo guardé como una ofrenda de mi amor hacia ti, para que nunca me olvides. Dame la mano, amigo mío del corazón.
And one of the things that happened as a result of La Esquina Habanera was the formation of this folklore group called Raíces Habaneras that actually was nominated for a Grammy Award. I think around 2002, 2003, featured so many performers like David Oquendo, Roman Diaz, Pedrito Martinez, etc. And just to leave you with this, today there aren't that many venues for Cuban music in New Jersey, but there are four here that come to mind immediately where people go out and hear Cuban music, eat Cuban food. Um, and the scene is obviously diminished as many people have moved to Florida or left this part of New Jersey. But many Cuban musicians still live in this part of New Jersey, including people who have just come in the last few years. So it's very densely populated with Cuban musicians, but most of the places that these musicians tend to perform is in New York City or outside worldwide. But there are many Cuban musicians here. I could read a list, but I think I want to get to questions if anybody has any questions. So I think that's all the material I have to show you right now.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lapidus. If anybody does have questions, please feel free to submit them to us via the Q&A or the chat, and we'll be happy to address them. Let's see what's come in. Out of the artists that you covered today, which one is your favorite?
Well, that's not a fair question. I love all of them. Really do.
What got you interested in this topic?
This very particular topic I got interested in because probably 30 years ago I started performing here with a lot of in the Cuban community, and everything that I really knew was in the New York side in terms of Cuban music, Cuban culture. I would come over here to perform with different bands at different, uh, like I said, Cuban weddings, quinceañeras. I played Cuban bar mitzvahs. I played all different types of parties, and I felt as a scholar, I had always kind of put New York and New Jersey together. But in my real life, New Jersey and New York are distinct, right? You have to cross the river, right, to get here. So I thought it was important that as a scholar, I made sure to look at, like, place the research separately and go into the historical record here in New Jersey, look at archival data, and really put the New Jersey story on its own 2 feet as opposed to lumping things together in New York. Because even in Cuba, when you look at in Cuban music history books, they talk about the Camden, New Jersey recordings. They call it New York City. So I thought it was really important to make that distinction. If I made it myself as a musician and as a human being, then I needed to do it in the scholarship. But I come to Cuban music because it's a very long story, but through my father playing Cuban music and jazz, and then I have a distant family in Cuba as well. So I've been around this music for most of my life. But like I said, the focus on New Jersey was really just trying to make sure that I told the history of Cuban music in New Jersey as accurately as possible.
To what extent did musicians take part in the Cuban exiles political movement, and did any align with particular politicians?
That's a fantastic question. It merits a long response. In a very short attempt to answer you, there are many musicians who who are involved with Cuban exile political movement. Also, did align with particular politicians. I remember there was a grocery store here with the owner had pictures of him with lots of well-known politicians and presidents. There are Paquito de Rivera is a musician who comes to mind, who's been very outspoken over the years about what's going on in Cuba, but I don't think that he has a particular allegiance to a political party. I don't want to speak for him or anyone else, but I think there's a lot of a lot of obvious concern and expression of wanting to change the political situation in Cuba. So throughout history, there have been politicians from both political parties, both major political parties, that have sponsored events, and bands and musicians have performed at those events. Um, so one would really have to ask the musicians in particular, sort of what their political persuasions were. But I know there have been a lot of bands that performed at different events under different presidencies, particularly under the Bush presidency and Reagan presidency and so forth. And there are musicians who record songs discussing the political situation in Cuba and demanding a change for conditions in Cuba. To this day, there are young musicians in this part of New Jersey who have recorded songs speaking to that issue. Whichever side of the political spectrum people are on, that seems to be still an issue that people do discuss in the realm of music.
How popular was Cuban music outside of the Cuban community in New Jersey?
New Jersey. Well, I have to say that to my surprise, many of the newspaper announcements and clippings that I found from the 1930s and 1940s, none of them were in anything that I would be able to identify as a overwhelmingly Cuban community. They would be all the way in South New Jersey. They would be on the beach. They would be in Central New Jersey. I found performances by Afro-Cuban ensembles in the 1920s that you would never see again in New Jersey until the opening of that club, Esquina Habanera. So, they were not performing Cuban music in places where there were Cubans prior to 1959. There might have been a handful of Cubans. I mean, I found performances of Cuban music at Rutgers University prior to 1959, at different colleges in New Jersey, where there was not really a large population of Cuban musicians or Cubans. So surprisingly, it seems extremely popular compared to what one would think. One would think. Post 1959, obviously, we have the Bergen Line Strip, and then we have access to New York City, obviously, too. But 1959 to 1985, 1990, when you look at the newspapers in the Spanish-speaking community and the Cuban community, you have a lot of stuff. Prior to 1959, surprisingly, you have a lot of stuff, but none of it's in the Cuban community.
Did the Cuban musicians face any prejudice dealing with the Castro regime here in the United States, specifically maybe being called communist or communist sympathizers, anything like that?
Well, I think people who left, weren't, unless politically they openly identified, or it became known that they had identified as supporters of the government. But many musicians have stood out and criticized the government in terms of them receiving some sort of stigma having come. I think the musicians who came in the 1980s initially received a sort of questionable treatment. Part of that is because of their ethnicity, overwhelmingly Afro-Cuban, but also I think there was this thought for some people like, well, hey, if you had stayed there for so long, that means you must be a communist or something like that, when there was absolutely no opportunity for them to leave, perhaps. So, in terms of music, though, it doesn't really happen like that. Musically, the newest person comes bringing the newest information or whatever the latest trends are in Cuban music, and then they sort of plug into what's happening here in New Jersey or elsewhere, and they're all welcome with open arms. And the brotherhood, sisterhood of Cuban music and musicians is very open and accepting. So with each subsequent arrival of great musicians, they get further incorporated into the fold, and then people try to do different things. I think that group of Raíces Habaneras is a great example, because you have musicians who came during the time of the Maria boat lift. You have musicians who came during the exodus of 93, 94, the rafter exodus, the Barceros, and then musicians who came after that. And as people would come, they would kind of get incorporated into that group. They would go to Esquina Habanera to feel and hear rumba, because it was one of the few places that you could hear it, except perhaps the rumba in Central Park in New York City on Sundays. This was a place where the rumba could be played indoors. And then Afro-Cuban music, sort of from that standpoint, really got a jump. People like Pedrito Martinez and Roman Diaz and David Oquendo kind of did all different projects. A number of the musicians who are in the Buena Vista Social Club show on Broadway right now are from New Jersey, and also come out of that scene. So it's I think politics aside, I think as more people start coming in, they get incorporated into what's already here, and welcome with open arms. Although there have been some instances, I think, where people might question somebody's political position, but overwhelmingly, I would say the contrary.
Can you speak to the influences of other musical traditions upon the Cuban musicians who immigrated here?
Well, I think definitely contact with jazz musicians, and contact with musicians who play music from the Spanish-speaking world that is not Cuban. Puerto Rican musicians, in particular, Dominican musicians, and then all the Central American and Mexican communities that are around here. And now, Union City, West New York, North Bergen is much more diverse than it was. Now there's less Cubans and more Dominicans and more Central Americans. So in order to work as a musician, you kind of have to be able to play everything. And I think slowly some of those songs have come into the repertoire. People know to play La Pollera Colorada, which is a Colombian song. A lot of music from other parts of the world has been recorded by Cuban musicians. So I think definitely living here, Bergen Line Avenue, Union City, encountering music from other cultures definitely has an influence. And if you think about it, people like Willie Chirino, who is now a huge superstar, but he was here, living here for a long time. His music reflects an international influence as well. He doesn't just play Cuban music, so that's a great example to show that.
Alrighty. I don't see another questions, so I'm going to end with a comment that we got. This has been delightful. I grew up in Union City in the 1970s through the 1990s and still have family in the area. What a great walk down memory lane. It reinforces the great pride I have in my Cuban roots, such magnificent artists and unforgettable music. Thank you for the presentation. Azuka.
Thank you.
So, alrighty. Well, we really appreciate you, Dr. Lapidus, for sharing this wonderful piece of Cuban American heritage. It was fantastic to learn about. So we really appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for joining us.
Right, and then thank you everybody for attending today. We appreciate your continued support, and hopefully you enjoyed this little slice of New Jersey history. Everybody be safe, be well, and hopefully we'll see you soon.